Okay, so I'm going to make a start. And this is a follow-on session, really, from Khalida's opening presentation yesterday, to kind of take the idea of diversity and inclusion and also equity and equality. We're going to explore a little bit later, and move on from that to a bit more of a sort of action plan of what we can do as Suzuki teachers, and why it is, in my opinion, a responsibility of ours to try and diversify what we're doing and who we're doing it with. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is why diversity is important. Why is it a good thing? Why is it something that is, I think after the events of 2020, it's suddenly become a lot more present for many people who were not necessarily thinking about it very much before. But why is it a useful thing, and why is it something that we are all suddenly thinking and talking and working on a lot? So I just wanted to read to you first, and I'll do this next, is this brilliant book by Bell Hooks called Teaching to Transgress. And I will put all of these resources in the email that I send you out, with loads of probably overwhelming numbers of pieces of paper attached to it after this session. But Bell Hooks is an African-American educator working mostly in academia rather than in schools or music like us. But I think this book has got some really brilliant things to say, and I just wanted to read a little bit of what she writes in her Embracing Change essay. It has been as a teacher in the classroom setting that I have witnessed the power of a transformative pedagogy rooted in a respect for multiculturalism. Working with a critical pedagogy based on my understanding of Freire's teaching, who's a Brazilian educator that I would also recommend we all read, I enter the classroom with the assumption that we must build community in order to create a climate of openness and intellectual rigor. Rather than focusing on the ideas of safety, I think that a feeling of community creates a sense that there is a shared commitment and a common good that binds us. What we all ideally share is the desire to learn, to receive actively knowledge that enhances our intellectual development and our capacity to live more fully in the world. It has been my experience that one way to build community in the classroom is to recognize the value of every single individual voice. So I think obviously she's talking about a much more kind of intellectual approach to learning than we are. But if you just sort of substitute, well, not even substitute, add in musical as well as intellectual, I think everything in there sounds very in line with Suzuki philosophy and Suzuki approach. So let's not just listen to my voice, but have a few people unmute if you would like to share. I hope you can all see my whiteboard. Yep, great. Share what do you think about why diversity is good? Why is this something that we want to foster more of?
It's enriching.
Thank you very much. My typing skills have gone out of the window. Okay, enriching, excellent. Anyone else?
You learn different viewpoints on things. You learn things different.
Yeah. And I think if anyone is struggling with the idea of diversity, then you can just substitute the word difference, and then we all suddenly understand exactly what it means. That we have all been in a situation where we think, I feel different from people here, and yet often when we think about diversity, we think about minoritized groups, and it's not only minoritized groups that is what diversity is. Diversity is not making sure that you have the rainbow and different races and different classes and different abilities and different genders and LGBT people represented in your group, but it is everybody's difference. And I think that's a really important thing, that when we think about it in a Suzuki context, especially if you're working in an area that seems very lacking in diversity that you can see on the surface, you can think, well, I can't do anything about diversity because I live in a completely white town, for example. And of course, that's just one type of diversity. So there is all different types of diversity that we can engage with. Any more thoughts for this list?
My own experience is really about diversity of learning styles and rates of progress and different family circumstances, which sometimes make it difficult for parents to be as involved as another parent. It's really, a question of keeping going with those kids and making them feel included and, not giving up sometimes when it's just really difficult for the teacher. And it can be difficult for the studio as well if, it's people of the same age, but not that they're not the same level, for your groups. You don't want to put them with the little ones. So that can be quite hard. So yes, that's my take on it.
Thank you. Other thoughts, anyone?
I also think it's, can you hear me?
Yes, lovely. Khalid, welcome.
Yeah, it's acceptance. Acceptance of the differences.
Yeah.
And it's empathy.
Yeah.
And it's not taking anything personal and viewing broader realities within the environment.
Right. And I think the empathy thing is so important. And like Khalida was saying yesterday, radical empathy is really something that we should all be engaging with. And so Khalida, I'll come to you.
Yes. Hi. I was just going to say expansion of thought processes. Because something that I remember in my Suzuki training that always really, it was like a bug in my craw, was this idea that we're teaching fine music, and fine music has this underlying connotation of the European style of learning, but actually who gets to determine what's fine versus not fine? So really expanding your process of how you view your students and their learning and the music that you're including in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important for Suzuki and classical music. Anyone else, or we'll close this?
Just saying, obviously, the blindingly obvious, that it's all about encouraging children to recognize that everybody is valued for who they are and what they bring.
Exactly.
Yeah, so along the same lines, I just like to say it's kind of representing what we think the wider world, reflecting what the wider world looks like as well. So we might live in a smaller community which might have less diversity in our smaller community, but we want to reflect what the wider world looks like.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I think this will save, but it's nothing that yes, it will. It's nothing that you couldn't reproduce for yourself, just a little bit of other people's voices than my own. So I think that it's really important as Suzuki teachers and as educators more generally. I think it's really important that we have the humility to look at what we do, what we represent, and crucially how we're viewed by people who are not in our very closed circles, often very closed circles. And what are some of the criticisms that we face as Suzuki teachers that we can address that are actually at heart about a lack of diversity? And lots of this comes from classical music. It's viewed as pretty white. It's most of the canon is, dead white, old, mostly straight guys. We are not known in Suzuki for being collaborative and outward looking. We are pretty insular. Most of the events that you would go to, most of the events I go to in Suzuki are with other Suzuki teachers, with Suzuki families, and that's lovely, but it's not a common practice, I would say, to go to something that it's a joint project with a Suzuki teacher and, for example, Suzuki Hub has played at the Hackney Carnival. And, I think it was the first time the kids had been on a stage where there was a rapper just before us. And then there was I think it was a taiko drumming group, but, something very different right after us. And we were kind of part of that whole group, rehearsing together, talking together. And, this is a really brilliant experience for those kids. And this is not generally what I see in the Suzuki world. And I think that we can, each of us has to make our own choice whether we want to be part of the change or whether we're happy inhabiting what's happening currently. And that's not to say, you know, if you just want to sit still and be in what you're doing right now, then bad you should be part of the change at all. It's, I think, the self-awareness of knowing where you want yourself to be, where you want your students, where you want your studio to be, is the most important thing. That if you are doing your own thing and you feel like, for me right now, this is what I'm doing and this is appropriate and this feels good, then that's great. Like, do your thing. Don't come to a conference like this and think, oh God, I really should be doing X, Y, Z. But I think have the self-awareness to be making a choice and not just doing it because that's what it's, you know, kind of automatically is happening. So I think it's, you know, one of the things that I have struggled with within the Suzuki worlds that I inhabit is a lack of mostly racial diversity. I think that we can really easily conflate, put together different types of diversity. We can think, well, why are we, you know, we're so lacking in racial diversity? Well, it's because we don't have discounts available. Well, that's just, that's it's useful to have discounts, but it's not like every Black family in the UK needs a discount to come and access our services by any means. It's about being open and encouraging different types of families to come and not making assumptions like that very assumption, like, oh, well, if you don't have a discount, you won't want to come or be able to come. So thanks, Khalida. I think that this is a really important thing that, you know, it's a kind of get us off the hook, get out of jail free card to think, I don't have funding, I don't have the time and the energy and the skills to get funding, and therefore I can't diversify my teaching studio. Well, that's just, you know, yeah, it's much easier if you do have money, but that's not the only way to do it. So I think that to kind of just dig a little deeper into how it ends up being the case that we have, by and large, and I hope nobody is really going to feel like I'm misrepresenting Suzuki in the UK, a kind of upper middle class white teaching and student body. Like this is what I see in most Suzuki that I go to. It's mostly white. It's mostly pretty well off, and I think, you know, there are pockets of people who are doing things differently, like Suzuki Hub, like Dulwich Suzuki Group, but that tends to be the kind of overall experience. And I think we're only just now starting to think that, wouldn't it be great if that wasn't the overall experience? And one of the things that I think really makes such a difference to this is that on the teacher training, you're taught very much how to do the teaching. There's not very much about setting up your studio, but more importantly than that, Suzuki has this cachet among the upper middle classes that people want it. As soon as you're qualified to teach, even the first levels, you tend to just put your name on the British Suzuki website and then boom, you're full with the same types of students as what I've just described. And I think that I've just been involved in an equity, diversity and inclusion set of meetings with British Suzuki Institute teachers. And one of the things that happened that was talked about a lot by the teachers who were in those groups, all of whom, you know, we all signed up to be part of that group to change this kind of homogenous culture, or to be part of starting to change it and discussing it. And I think one of the things that came up as a really strong reason for this is that they needed students when they first qualified. The students came, they told the students they needed more students. The students brought more students like those students. And then suddenly you're full and you end up with a teaching practice that looks very samey. And for most of us, that's, you know, middle-class white kids. And I think that that part of what is happening in that situation is nobody's fault at all, but that we can take a different, more proactive approach to changing that. And that's got to come from teacher training, that if it's discussed at the teacher training, that this is what's going to happen. So if you're interested in building a more diverse group of students, because, you know, you want to teach your students for what, 10 years? Like, it so often happens that we just are in the middle of getting our studio up and running, and then suddenly one day, however many years after you've started teaching, you look at it and you kind of go, oh, that's happened. But you don't want to, like, okay, I'm going to ditch 30% of my students and replace them with kids from more diverse families. Like, this is not, you know, a caring way to behave either. So I think that for me, when I've thought about this, I think it has to come from setting up different expectations while we're still training, and then really equipping people with the skills of marketing. And I think that one of the reasons that Suzuki Hub is standing out as a different demographic for Suzuki is that because we are on a different scale, you know, we have 20 teachers, 170 students, we are always having to market. We cannot just take who comes in the door, because we wouldn't be able to pay our bills. And so part of being in that situation where we're thinking, right, who do we want to come in, and who do we want to encourage, and where are we going to target those people, inevitably then lends itself to a different set of thoughts about how that's going to work and what that's going to make the look of Suzuki Hub going to, you know, what the result is going to be. And, you know, I started Suzuki in schools in 2004, which is a very long time ago now. And part of that was because I, you know, as an out queer woman, have often felt that I don't really belong in classical music, have quite often been made to feel that I don't belong in Suzuki in quite the way that I would like to, and I wanted to be part of the solution for making sure that the next generation of teachers doesn't feel like that. And so you know, and then on the other hand, a dichotomy of growing up in Suzuki, I was one of those upper middle class white kids. I went along, I didn't really think about the fact that it was quite lacking in diversity. I just went along to beautiful Lauderdale House with its beautiful grounds and did my group lessons and just thought, oh, how lovely, this is wonderful. And then we drove across London to Helen Brunner's house. You know, I mean, there are so many kids who can't access that kind of opportunities. And so I wanted to be part of extending those opportunities very actively out into the community. And obviously state primary schools are the best place to do that. But we can do that within our private practices as well. And I think that the taking who comes is also bound up with implicit bias. And unconscious bias, implicit bias are two words for the same thing. Basically, I'm going to show you a video about what it means, but I would urge you to use implicit bias, because I think unconscious bias is, it's a phrase that kind of gets you off the hook. Like, if you have an unconscious response to something, yeah, it's a free pass. You get out of whatever it is that you're acting on, because you just, you know, it's all like below the surface, you're not responsible for it. Whereas of course you are responsible for it, and you have to take responsibility. And so if you think of it as implicit bias, it's like, oh, what am I doing right now that I'm acting on that impulse that is implicit in me, but it doesn't just kind of mean, okay, let's not worry about it. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat, which I think is mostly from Khalida. There we go. Okay, so let's watch this little video. I tell you, if any of you fancy a sideline in making videos, I have spent hours and hours and hours combing YouTube for like 2-minute videos about why diversity is good, implicit bias versus explicit bias, and equity versus equality. And I found good videos for the last 2, but it literally took me hours and hours and hours to do so. And I have not been able to find a good video about why diversity is a valuable thing to embrace. So if you want to make one, go for it. Okay, so
Psychologists have known for some time that we have 2 operating systems for processing information within the brain, working at the same time but doing very different things with the same information: the conscious and the unconscious. The conscious is part of our new brain, developed fairly recently. This is where most of the clever thinking goes on: problem solving, decision making. It is slow in operation, taking several seconds to process even basic information and to make decisions. It is very limited in processing power, just 8 bits of information at any one time, and it is driven by taught rules about how to do things and how to think. It relies on logically processing data. We believe that it is in control because in our lives we see all of the achievements of the conscious: technology, civil society, agriculture, the list goes on. The unconscious, on the other hand, is rarely seen working. It runs constantly and effortlessly in the background, handling all of our routine information processing, a sort of autopilot. Instead of being slow and data-driven, it is incredibly fact and intuitively driven. It is a processing method needed by our ancestors to make rapid survival decisions. Brain scan evidence shows it processes information in people in as little as 30 milliseconds, 10 times faster than our eyes can even process the person's face. It has much more processing power than the conscious, 200,000 times more. Psychologists say that what the brain fires together, it wires together. In other words, when it often sees two things occurring together, like women with children or women receptionists, it creates a strong neural connection in the brain, which it can use in the future. For example, when it sees women, it thinks children, and when it thinks children, it makes the connection to women. This is very convenient for the brain. It prevents it having to use the conscious to think about every new person or situation as unique. The brain makes these neural connections from the patterns we see in our lives, but also from the media we absorb and what the people we care about say, as well as our upbringing. Once wired, they are hard to unwire, and we can use them automatically and without knowing it. It is our caveman or cavewoman brain. Let me put things into perspective. If the processing power of the conscious was the size of a table tennis ball, the processing power of the unconscious is a table tennis ball 200,000 times larger, or 2.4 meters across. When the small conscious table tennis ball is busy or overwhelmed, which it often is, the unconscious takes over routine people decisions using its neural pathways based on previous patterns. The next bit is important. Our unconscious creates super fast connections between groups of people: old, young, black, white, with tattoos, wearing funny t-shirts, having a particular accent, from a particular area or country, educated at a particular school or university, and good or bad ideas the psychologists call constructs. These super fast links are used to make rapid people judgments below the level of our subconscious. The conscious thinks it is in control, but the unconscious calls the shots and leaves the conscious to believe it is in control by rationalizing decisions the unconscious has already made. These super fast people decisions are useful in making our lives run smoothly. Most of the time they are good enough, and our ancestors avoided the saber-toothed tiger or lion. But these days, our people decisions result in real impacts on the lives of real people. Who gets the job? Who gets the most rewarding work? Who gets the best pay or bonus? And who gets promoted or fired? We tend to wire more positive connections for people who are like us, who look like us, sound like us, share our background, culture, and interests. That leaves people who are less like us not being treated as positively. Don't get me wrong, often these more positive wirings for people who are like us does not lead to obvious negative behavior towards people not like us. But they experience what the psychologists call micro-behaviors, small bits of behavior which, over time, make them feel less like they belong or are valued, like acid rain that wears you down over time. It leads to us recruiting and supporting people who are more like us. We don't do it on purpose. We don't have a tick list reminding us to give slightly better treatment to people like us, but our unconscious leads us to do that unless we are careful. The bottom line is that we trust people for whom we have unintentionally wired positive connections. We give them jobs, give them the best work, allocate them to our teams, and say the right things about them when it matters. This doesn't make us a bad person. It makes us human, but when we make important decisions about people, we need to take extra care. If you are now asking, what can I do about it? You should watch our animated session where we offer some ideas, sometimes slightly weird ideas, on mitigating unconscious bias. Or watch our whiteboard animation on recruiting and how unconscious bias drives our decisions about who we employ. You can contact...
I hope that that was interesting and useful, and sorry to the people who've already watched it once before. So I think that it's really, you know, when you start to, this is the kind of stuff that once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. And I think an example within Suzuki could be, how many institutes do you go on when there are a lot more male teachers at the workshops than there are in Suzuki generally? How many times have you gone to a conference where the keynote speaker is a white man and yet we're working in an environment that is overwhelmingly women. Teacher trainers, you know, all of this stuff, you can just see we are hardwired to think that men are more competent, that they are going to do a better job, especially in management. And therefore, you can look even in Suzuki, where we think that we're all extremely open-minded and meritocratic. And you can see that that is actually working behind the scenes. And the way to get over it is to be aware of it and to realize, like that guy in the video was saying, that it's your, you know, unconscious brain and not something that is really worth perpetuating. I think if you are interested in reading a more kind of general thing about how problems with diversity, unconscious bias, implicit bias, etc., affect minoritized communities in the UK, this book is absolutely amazing. It's from 2015, but sadly, I don't think there's going to be a massive difference in outcomes. But this, I mean, you know, I've been really heavily politically involved with this stuff for 25 years, and some of what I read in this book is absolutely shocking. And even someone who felt like I had a pretty good awareness of what the situation was, I was kind of like, oh my God. So that is a very, very good way to educate yourself about the actual, you know, broader repercussions for our society in the UK. So I think that to try and work towards a culture of inclusion and to have more diverse options for our students and for ourselves about for our students and for the families that we work with and as colleagues to each other. I think Zoom has been amazing. One of the really brilliant side effects in a horrendous 12 months, or for most of us 10 to 11 months, has been that suddenly the world has shrunk and we can communicate so easily with people who are like-minded around the world and not just stay within our kind of geographical Suzuki bubble, or our geographical bubble otherwise. It's kind of ironic that we are not allowed to really go very far away from our houses at the moment here in the UK, but online we are making connections with people all over the place, and that is so fantastic. And you know, yesterday when Khalida said, I'm fed up with, you know, begging for a place at the table, like I'm going to make my own table, and I'm sure some of you saw, I was like, yeah, we've made our own table, this is it, you're all invited, and I'm really pleased that you came to it. But that resonated so strongly with me, and some of you will know why more than others. But you know, I think that this has been an incredible thing, that we've realized how easy it is to reach out to each other and how many connections you can make, even if you've never met, even if you're on different sides of the globe. But in terms of like very active things that you can do once the world has opened back up, but even before it's opened back up, I think to think about a way to be more collaborative within your teaching practice. You can invite people to join your group classes to do a solo for your students. You can contact other musicians in your local area who are doing, for example, a concert, and think about whether you would like to do something with them. You can you know, very easily diversify the actual music that you're teaching now. Khalida did mention yesterday, there's music by Black musicians, Black composers, sorry, which I'm involved in trying to find out if we can get it printed in the UK, because it's extremely expensive to get at the moment. And I'm really hoping we will be able to do that, although they are also looking at a new publisher who's internationally represented, so hopefully I won't have to do it. It will just happen from them changing their publisher. But those books are really excellent, and I really, really recommend that you get them if you are a violinist. And also we had a talk about this in the discussions with British Suzuki we were having, and I did a quick search for pianists. There are loads of amazing resources online. You just put in like diverse piano repertoire. There is loads of stuff by women, there is loads of stuff by people of color, there is loads of stuff from different cultures. Not so much for other instruments that I could see, but you know, the internet's an amazing thing. We can all just do a quick search and educate ourselves, can't we? I think one of the things that people get caught up in is that they are worried about saying the wrong thing, and therefore they don't say anything. And as a minority, I always really appreciate when people try and include me very obviously, even if they say something that doesn't like really ring true. We are so forgiving when we feel that someone's making an effort. And when you're not making an effort, even if you are inside your own head, when you can't tell that someone's making an effort, it just looks like collusion. Like if you stand by and you never ever mention the fact that having an entirely white teaching studio or never doing a project with anyone else who looks or behaves differently from yourself is a problem, then you can very easily be interpreted as not thinking it's a problem because you've never said it is. And you know, the world is very different from how it has been in the past. But I think, you know, my wife and I were talking about this the other day. You still have to make it very clear to me that you think it's okay that I'm gay and that I talk about it and that I'm married to a woman and that I co-parent with my daughter's dad and that he is also gay and that it's okay to talk to kids about being gay and blah, 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 blah. Because if you just don't ever say anything, then there's a part of me that's like, okay, am I being appreciated by you? Not even appreciated by you, accepted by you, tolerated. You know, there's a lot of discussion about toleration and we're a tolerant country. I don't want to be tolerated, thank you very much. You tolerate a wart on your foot. Like, I want to be embraced and celebrated. And so I think that one of the things that we can all do is to actually make sure that the language we use is inclusive and that we do actually celebrate diversity where we do find it. I think that talking about the money thing, it's really useful if you can have discounts available to students if you want to have a socioeconomic diversity within your studio. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, you're not going to get poorer students coming to learn with you if your rates are set for the middle classes, right? That's kind of obvious. And I think that it comes back to that, how you set your studio up and how you start teaching kind of then sets the pace for the rest of how you work, often for the rest of your career, but sometimes until you move city or something and you have a kind of chance to do it again. But I think that, you know, we can very easily build in discounts to what we do, and lots of us do it in a kind of disorganized way that, you know, you might have a friend of one of your students come to you and say, I really want to do what Millie's doing, but we just can't afford the fees. And you say, okay, so don't worry about it. Why don't you just come for half price? Or you have in your mind, I will teach X number of kids for a discount or X number of kids for free. But that can, you know, and that's amazing. Like, I do not want to sound like I'm accusing anyone of being lacking in generosity, but I think we can kind of formalize that a little bit. And if you think about equity versus equality, which is what we're going to have a video to show you about that next, then it's very easy. Equality, essentially speaking, equality is giving everybody the same offer. My teaching fees are £50 an hour. It's £50 an hour for you, and it's £50 an hour for you, and it's £50 an hour for everyone. Well, that obviously doesn't enable someone who can't afford £50 an hour to come and learn with you. And equity is about trying to make the offer suitable for everyone. And sometimes that means for you, my rates are £75 an hour, and for you, my rates are £5 an hour. And that means that everybody can access those lessons. And I think that we have so far been in a culture of Suzuki teachers as we want to be recognized for the fact that we have an extremely onerous training program. We've worked really hard to become Suzuki trained teachers, and we're really good. We deserve to get paid well. All of those things are absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that what you have to do is have the highest rates that the market will support, because then that's how you end up teaching kids who go to private school, who jet off on holiday 3 times a year to sunny climes, and who buy £5,000 instruments. But what you can do is think about, okay, well, what if I just see if my most well-off students' families could afford an extra £10 an hour rather than putting up by £1 each year or each other year, and say to them very clearly, I'm going to charge you more because I think that you recognize that Suzuki is so brilliant, it should be available to people who can't afford it. And if you pay me these extra fees, then I will be able to offer those families the support that they need to be able to do that. And that is the inbuilt discount structure that we have had at Suzuki in schools, and that we have at Suzuki Hub, and that I run for the Halloween festival. And the something about the magic of who wants Suzuki and who is able to commit to it and who spreads the word just means that for me and my personal experience, we have never been overwhelmed by a lack of the right balance for us. Less so now in Suzuki Hub, particularly with COVID. We have many more people who want a discount, and obviously we could fill Suzuki up with people who couldn't afford anything, and just like we could fill it up with people who could afford anything. But that balance really tends to work very well for us, and I recommend you try it if you're inspired to do so. I'm going to show you a video. Let me just line it up. About equity versus equality, put much better than I can.
Before we can talk about equity versus equality, I want to first define diversity. At Inclusive Communities, we like to say diversity in its simplest definition means differences. We all have differences, from our glasses to our weight to how much money we have. That is diversity, and no matter how much people say it's hard to find diversity, that's not true. Diversity exists. It's about taking the time to acknowledge its existence and work to ensure action is taken to embrace these differences, not alienate them. Equality is often equated to fairness and sameness, and is based in the misconception that we all have the same needs and the same solution will work for everyone. Equity is based in access and opportunity, with the understanding that we each start with different advantages and disadvantages, and thus have different needs to attain access and opportunity. To understand equity, we have to compare it to equality. Now, I love this equity versus equality graphic, as it's the best explanation of the difference between the two. On the equality side, you see that we've got three individuals, our tall guy, our short girl, and our friend in the wheelchair. And you see that they're all trying to watch this baseball game, but there's this fence. With equality, they've each been given a box to use to be able to see the game. But obviously that's not working, because our tall friend is now super tall and sees very clearly over the fence, while our short girl can just barely see, and she's still kind of on her tiptoes and struggling to see the game, while the person in the wheelchair can't see at all and they can't even get on the box. On the equity side of this picture, you can see that now we've given each individual exactly what they need to be able to see the game. The person in the wheelchair has a ramp, so they can clearly get to the top and see the full game. The shorter girl has two boxes, which is what she needed to comfortably be able to see, and the tall person has no boxes at all because they didn't need the extra assistance in the first place. Equity is a process, which means it is continuous. We can't gain equity by changing just one thing. For example, the equity side of this photo shows our friend in the wheelchair has gained equity at this fence, but the work is not done. True progressive equity is about how can we ensure that he has equitable opportunities at all of the hypothetical and real fences in his life. Equity requires power, resources, and social responsibility to work hand in hand to change the structures and provide opportunities to those who were institutionally left out, marginalized, or oppressed. Equity is hard, but it's essential for us to make change in the lives of those who have been historically depicted as less than. From individuals with disabilities like physical, developmental, and mental, to people living in poverty without access to food or education or healthcare. It's important for us to understand that there is a long history of discrimination, which has created the present day inequities which don't allow these individuals the same access to opportunity than those who don't have those differences. One of the greatest gifts that we give to students that we work with is the opportunity to share their story and to find value in their voice. And this increases awareness and a sense of empowerment. Everyone has their own stuff. Everyone is going through something that challenges their emotional and physical capacity to be great. but there is power in connection. So now here's your challenge. Be brave and seek out those opportunities to have authentic conversations with those that are different than you. Find out what makes them unique and what brings them joy. Then you do the same. Share your story because you have value as well. Now you've built community. And with community, we have power. We is always stronger than me.
Okay, so just before we open up to a broader discussion and Q&A, I think that it's really, I hope that you're feeling inspired to make a change. And that change might not happen today, it might not happen this year, it might be something that you just feel I'm totally full up with just dealing with everything that this year has put my way so far, and that's absolutely fine. But if you are feeling that you would like to make a change, I think that this is the time to write it down, make some sort of commitment to it, and then revisit it at a point where you do feel that you have the energy to do it. So we kind of did a little bit of this yesterday, but maybe just keep thinking about that. And we're just going to take 2 minutes to have those thoughts, make those notes, and then we will have Q&A and a broader discussion. Okay, so thank you. Does anyone have any questions, or you might want to share what you've decided that you would like to make as a change? Thoughts, comments? Go for it if anyone has anything they would like to share. Don't be shy. Joe.
Okay, I'd like to say that yesterday, after Khalida's wonderful and inspiring talk, I was desperate to ask her, okay, you've said all this inspiring stuff I'm going to go out there and do. What am I going to do? And what I really wanted to say to you, Khalida, was how? And we've discussed some of that today. But the reason that I didn't say that to you yesterday was that I actually felt worried. I felt too different from you to ask you. Which is ridiculous, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yes.
And the first thing I've written down on my list is to be brave to connect with everyone, and to think of similarities more than, if that's the right word, to think of connections more than differences, and to get out there and not be afraid.
Yes, it's to jump in the deep end, knowing that you can't swim, and then fight for it.
Yeah.
That's how I look at this work. I lean into the discomfort. I lean into the failures in that moment, because to not do that is to not actually know what you can actually accomplish, how you can transform the community you're serving, the individuals you're friends with, you're talking to. Because I guarantee you probably have a couple of slick friends that you might need to have some conversations with, and just see where they're at on the radar. And this is not to attack them, but it's just to say, have you ever considered, or would you ever consider? It's uncomfortable. I mean, I still have a nice healthy list of friends, associates, that, I'm not looking at them through a judgment lens, but I'm definitely looking at them through a lens of, how can you say you believe in access for all, but you're very protective of what you have, and you're not willing to sacrifice any of that, when I personally sacrifice daily. So I'm always looking at that, looking at things through that lens. But Joe, just jump in it. And that includes the comments that you and I were exchanging in the chat. Even I call men out too, because first of all, they seem to forget that they got here through us. Okay, like, can we just acknowledge that? Like, I just don't know why they feel that they are superhuman, and that we don't have a lot of the same shared skill sets. And we are built, our brains are all complex, and we're built to share information differently. We receive information differently, and that needs to be honored. So jump in the deep end, Joe. I'll catch you.
I will. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I'm coming at it from a very slightly different angle. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm very conscious in England at the moment that the schools are not open to most children. And this home situation is so different, with possibly two parents working, trying to juggle teaching the children, doing their own work, whatever. So I've given the option that if people want to give the children longer lessons, I won't charge for the extra time. Now, that it is an equal offer. It's up to people to take it up if they wish, but I feel it's something, I just feel so strongly how difficult it must be for them, and obviously we all want them to continue enjoying their music.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Brilliant thing to do.
That is. And I was just going to say, Allison, there's no recipe, right? Like, there's no perfect antidote for what we're experiencing, because let's be honest, this is complete chaos. Okay. Our parents are actually trying to do their actual jobs while their children are at home, reacting and responding to the psychotic nature of life right now. And they have to smile, they have to give the best customer support, they have to solve problems, and then somebody has gone to the bathroom on themselves because they're not fully potty trained, and someone else is hungry, and maybe the light bill has got, I mean, the amount of chaos that is existing in our space right now, and in our family spaces, in our community, you can't control it all, and you can only do what you can do. And so I applaud you for even making that an option. I might have to steal that and just activate a little conversation in the States, because we are stingy here, 37 minutes, okay? 3700.
And I think also I want to reassure everyone that equity versus equality doesn't mean that every option that is the same for everyone is bad. Like, don't feel that, oh, maybe I should have been offering an extra half an hour to some families and extra 5 minutes to others. That's not what I want anyone to feel. I'm aware that we have some people with cameras off, so let me just look at the chat. Yeah, I think absolutely. Thank you, Nicola. The importance of asking questions is really important to talk to our students about. And I think also that, the Suzuki philosophy angle of the teacher training and our understanding of what that means, it's become clear this year how different that can be. And that for me, I've always interpreted the Suzuki philosophy as being very much about social justice and access, inclusion, and what does it mean to try and create better human beings? It doesn't mean kids who say please and thank you for stickers and do what their parents ask them to in practice. It means kids who are well, it does mean that too, but, you know, I think a lot of us can stop there. And it's really, you know, I think it's also, we can turn that into a conversation about in what way are our societies not actually producing brilliant human beings? What is systemic racism? How does that mean it's being played out? It's not your parents versus their parents. It's not anybody's fault, but let's look at actually, what does that mean to be in a culture where there is, you know, there are deeply held problems that we can be part of the solution, or we can stand by and continue to uphold through inaction. And I know that's pretty full on for some people. They'll be like, oh my God, Kate, chill out. But I do think that that's a really, you know, it's, again, like we were saying in the beginning, it's important for us to be self-reflective enough to know where we want to sit on that spectrum. I would like to know how you operate your fee structure. How do you broach with, thank you very much. The easiest way to talk about it is through Suzuki Hub. We are very open about being an anti-racist organization, about being a left-wing organization, and about being an inclusive organization. And for us, that very much falls in line with most of Hackney. Of course, there are people in Hackney who don't subscribe to those ideals, but that's very much a kind of, you know, that's a similar kind of broad statement that you can make. And therefore, most of the families that we have at the top end of the income spectrum are delighted to hear that they are being fleeced in order to support low-income families to be a part of us. And, you know, I remember 10 years ago when we started Suzuki Hub saying to my friends, like, we've got, or maybe 9 years ago, we had our first concert, you know, like, look at the kids on stage. It's such a diverse group, but how can I stand on stage and say, I really appreciate that we have black and brown children on the stage playing violin, as well as white kids. I just don't know how to, I don't know what the words are. I don't know how to use the language. I don't know how to talk about it, but I'm really proud of it. And it's what I work every day towards fostering. So what do I do here? And friends of mine saying, well, you do just say that. You do say, I am really pleased to be a part of encouraging the diversity. And when I look at the kids at Suzuki Hub, it looks like Hackney, and we represent our local community. And that makes me really pleased. And that makes me really happy. And so I think perhaps there are families who contact us and find out that the top level of fees, I mean, I think, to put it in context, our top level of fees is a pretty standard Suzuki price, maybe a bit more, but it's certainly not like, you know, we're charging double for the parents who can afford it. And therefore it's a, you know, I mean, our fees are not as much as the West London expensive groups. So, you know, I don't think it would be obvious to someone who just inquires about the fee structure, oh, there must be something going on here because that's so much money. I think it becomes obvious when we say, you know, it's this because part of what happens with that money is that it supports us. And obviously, as a social enterprise, we also have like a legal not-for-profit status, which it makes it, again, easier to talk about, that we are, you know, we are charging high fees for the top level of family income, because that enables us to meet our social enterprise commitments, which is to extend our services to the broader community and not just to the parents who can afford it.
Sorry, Kate, I just wanted to say, how do you make the judgment? Obviously, you don't means test them, so... We
do means test them.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
oh my goodness.
We look at how much they earn compared with everyone else.
Right. I find that so tricky in my little community, because a lot of the time, the people who come to me may be people who I already know, or are friends of who I already know. It's tiny, and it's...
means testing the people who pay full price. We're means testing the families who apply for a discount. So if you call us up and say, I'd like to learn with you, I say, it's this much money. We have discounts available if you would like to know about them. And if they say, yes, I'd like to know about them, I send them a form that says, have a look at this. If this seems kind of right to you, then fill it in and we will let you know what sliding scale discount we can offer you. And if it seems like, and we just have we have a very broad brushstroke guideline that if your income is above 30,000 for one child or 65,000 for two children, you won't get a discount from us. And if your income, unless you have a particular situation, for example, with COVID, even if you were earning 500,000 last year and it's gone down to 200,000, we would still give you a discount for the period in which your outgoings are so much higher than your incoming, even though I would love to have 200,000 a year to live on. So, you know, it's there are always exceptions, but that's how it works generally.
That's really interesting to know. My problem is that I think almost every family I teach is struggling in one way or another, especially at the moment. So, but I'm going to think about how I can implement it.
Yeah,
thank you.
Really a sad and important point.
Alida,
what do you want to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that you were talking about how do you say how pleased you are that your studio represents the community. Honestly, like when I talk about that, I always say, you know, it's an honor to be able to authentically have a space that represents what the community I'm serving actually looks like. Because we know what those silos and barriers look like of organizations and schools, where you can clearly see the demographic and the social breakdown and barriers. And unfortunately, there's still so much work that needs to be done around stamping the scholarship stamp on students versus they are just students in my studio. They are just students in this community, in this program. So I always lead with what an honor it is, you know, because it is an honor. We're so lucky to be able to be a part of so many different individuals' lives.
Absolutely. And we're coming to the end of this session. Hi, Elizabeth. But I think that one of the things I want to say about it is that if you have a sliding scale of discounts built into your program, you will inevitably have families who look different signing up for a discount, but that will mean that you have families who look different who don't need a discount also signing up, because obviously we don't stick a badge on our kids who are on discount like I'm one of the free ones. You know, everyone just comes, they're in group class together, we do everything together. And what it means is that once you have a visual diversity that's accessible, and like I've said a million times, that's not the only kind of diversity I'm interested in, but once you have that you know, mostly racial diversity visible, then that acts as a marketing tool within itself. And those people will make it clear to other families, this is a place we will feel included and we will feel welcomed, and not, you know, I ran our first sort of set of parent education courses online because we couldn't do the normal thing that we do here last year. And I did the first session, and then I just went around the room and asked the parents if they could just say what the first thing was that they kind of felt about what I'd said about Suzuki Hub. It's really difficult to kind of give a clear idea of what we're doing when it's just on Zoom. And, you know, the first woman who spoke was a Black woman who said, I just want to say, whenever I have this situation that my child wants to do something like violin or ballet or something like that, I have this feeling of trepidation, like, am I going to walk in that room? Is it going to be right for me? Or am I going to want to walk out as soon as I've gone in? And, you know, I really identify with that, because most times I walk into a concert hall, I want to walk straight back out again. I get weird looks, I don't feel welcome, it's not the place for me. But of course it is, I'm a professional musician. And so I just felt like that was just such a fantastic thing to hear from her, because I felt like, wow, we are really managing this then. If she's walking in the room on Zoom and her first thing is like, I just want to say, I can feel that this is a safe place for me. And so that is a really, you know, a small thing lots of us can do that makes a huge difference. See you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.